Thank you, Kate. It's great to be with you. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, all of you who work with UCS. This is a really important organization in our community, and you represent other organizations, and you come together to address critical issues, and I'm so grateful for that. So we want to talk a little bit about social isolationism, or social isolation, and the talk I've given is the topic I'm just calling, We All Need Somebody to Lean On. And we know that, we feel it, but it's really critical that we as community leaders are playing some role in thinking about how do we help people connect in our community. So Sue Bourne, a filmmaker who produced the BBC documentary The Age of Loneliness, notes that we are all a bit scared of loneliness, of being alone, of being left, of not being loved or needed or cared about. Lonely hits a spot of fear in all of us, even if we don't acknowledge it. Loneliness is not the same thing as solitude, however, so we need some time alone, all of us do. My wife's an introvert, and she needs time alone, and I tend to be an extrovert. I don't need quite as much of that. For about the first 20 years of our church's existence, I was working every night of the week, or almost every night of the week, with a couple nights off. And more recently, I actually have like 3 nights a week off, sometimes 4, and it's kind of nice for me. But, you know, the other day I was with LaVon, and she needs her solitude, and she said, "Don't you have a church meeting you need to go to right now, or somewhere you need to be?" I was, horning in on her quiet time, her alone time, and so we need that. All of us need some time alone. We need time to think, we need time to pray, we need time just to, rest or to veg, but we also have a need for companionship. This is an important part of our lives. We have a scripture that we talk about at Church of the Resurrection a lot, and it comes from one of the Gospels where there was a man who was paralyzed. And he couldn't move, and his friends were with him, and they were really concerned about him. And they heard that Jesus had come to town and that Jesus was able to heal people, and so they thought, we're going to take our friend to Jesus. So they carried him on a stretcher, and they went to find the place where Jesus was, but he was teaching in a house, and they were it was jam-packed, and there was no way they could get their friend to Jesus. So they hoisted him on the rooftop, and then they ripped off the roof of the house, and they lowered him down by ropes down in front of Jesus. And Jesus smiled, and he looked at the man, and he looked at the men up above, and he said, because of their faith, he healed the man. And we talk about that at Resurrection as, do you have stretcher bearers in your life? There were 4 people who cared so much about their friend that they would do whatever it took to make sure he got help. And the reality is we all need stretcher bearers. Kate and Julie were asking if you had 2 people, and I'm going to suggest you actually probably need 4. And of course, the only way to have a stretcher bearer, as we know, the only way to have a friend is to what? To be a friend, right? So somewhere we have to invest in that, we have to give ourselves to that, and then we have to find opportunities where we can connect with each other. And that's becoming increasingly difficult in our increasingly digital world. So I know I'm not preaching, and this will be the last scripture I'm going to share, but I think it's kind of an important one in my mind, and that's the story of the creation in Genesis chapter 1. There are 2 creation stories in the Bible. Genesis 1 is a liturgy. It's poetry. And at the end of each day, you may remember, that it was evening and it was morning, the first day, the second day. But also after God had created whatever he'd created, we read this refrain, and he saw that it was good. And he saw that it was good. And he saw that it was good. But then you get to Genesis chapter 2, and the scripture says, then God looked at the man that he had made, and he saw that he was alone, and he said, it is not good that the man is alone. John Milton, writing in the 17th century, author of Paradise Lost, wrote, loneliness, speaking of this text, loneliness is the first thing that God's eye saw that God said was not good. Now, we all feel a little bit of that loneliness. We're social creatures. I know people who think they're hermits. They don't really like to be around people, but even the hermits need somebody sometimes. I live out in the country. LaVon and I live at 193rd and Mission Road. And we're in an area where people do strange things. Like if they don't like a pet, they drop them off in our neighborhood. So we end up with cats. I have no idea where they came from, but they just show up at the door. And we ended up with this mangy orange cat. It was a tabby, a male tabby, and he was clearly, I think, mistreated when he was, when he was being raised. He just was just not healthy, and we don't take those animals always into our house, but we do try to feed them and take care of them. And so, I felt sad for this cat. Now he was mean, like he'd scratch at me when I'd walk out the door, and he'd hiss at me, and he was constantly meowing. And my wife's like, I don't want that cat anymore. Can we find a new home for him? He's like, not our house. We didn't even take him on. Like he just got dropped off here. And I'm like, no, we're going to feed him. So we fed him, and then the next year we got him a heated cat house in the wintertime because I felt bad that he was out there in the cold, and then a heated water bowl and all this stuff. And eventually, he kind of grew on me a little bit. He's still obnoxious. But I walk out at night, and he comes up and he just starts rubbing against my legs. He just won't leave me alone. And then I take my dog out, who's an indoor dog, and I take her out. She's a little dog about this big, and I take her outside to go to the bathroom to go potty at night. And this cat comes up and starts licking him and trying to jump on him and just desperately wants attention. And part of what struck me is even this mean, mangy, feral cat needs somebody to lean on, wants somebody to love him. Like, we're all creatures who need to be loved. And what happens if we don't have that? Right? And what happens is it becomes a kind of unhealthy situation for us. So we were created to be loved and to loved. We were created for companionship. Several years ago, a man in my congregation, he was 62 and he lost his wife. They'd been married for 42 years. And this is what he said to me. He said, "It hit me hard that I was alone in this empty house. Fear set in. Now what? Was I going to have to endure this empty feeling the rest of my life?" Right? There's various places where we feel that profound sense of emptiness or loneliness, and that was one. And there are many, many others. I was struck by two quotes not long ago. Einstein said this: "It's strange to be known so universally and yet to be so lonely." It's interesting, you can be he was one of the most famous men on the planet at the time when he said that. And yet just being known by people doesn't mean that you don't feel alone. As a senior pastor at Resurrection, we have thousands of members. But there are times I've realized, in fact, some years ago, LaVon and I went home from church one day and I said, do you ever feel alone in this big church? I mean, we started this church, and I know thousands of people by name, but sometimes I would go home from church and I would feel lonely. And the reality was that greeting people for 25 seconds at the end of the worship service does not create meaningful relationships. And so part of what I said to LaVon is we have got to form a group of people that we can get to know and care for. And we started a small group, and we just came up with 12 people that were in different ages and stages in life, and people that we'd known for some time. And I called them and I said, "Look, I don't want to teach this small group all the time. I just need a place where I can be a person, not the senior pastor of Church of the Resurrection. But would you be my friends in a small group?" And it sounded a little pathetic, but you know what? I just knew I needed somebody to lean on. And those folks have become some of my dearest friends. We've traveled around the world. We've been with each other through loss of parents and been with each other during one another's weddings and, or kids' weddings and all of these kind of things. But that relationship has become, really important to me. I guess I wonder, do you have any stretcher bearers? I identify it this way at Resurrection. I say, do you have people who, if the wheels were coming off at 4 in the morning or 3 in the morning in your life, you could call them? And, it's not just the kind of casual friend, but it's the person who'd actually show up at 3 in the morning if the wheels were coming off your life. So, loneliness is a part of life. We recognize that. By the way, one of the other quotes I was reading was this one from Anne Hathaway, one of the great Oscar-winning actresses of our time. Loneliness, she says, is my least favorite thing about life. The thing that I'm worried about most is just being alone without anybody to care for or someone who will care for me. I mean, this is an Oscar-winning actress who's known by, countless millions of people. So I was thinking about, in Great Britain, there was a study done a couple of years ago on the impact of persistent and chronic loneliness. And they found the physical impact of loneliness was equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So the same impact on our health. And they described what was happening in Great Britain, and people in America are talking about the same thing as an epidemic of loneliness. So how do we get so lonely? Well, you may have your own ideas. I'm going to move this down just a smidge. You may have your own ideas, but I want to share with you at least a few thoughts that have run through my mind. One, 24% of Americans, only 24% of Americans live where they grew up. So how many of you actually still live in the neighborhood, the town, even if you're in Kansas City, the community you grew up in? Anybody? Okay, so about 30% of you, it looks like. I grew up in Kansas City, so this has been my home my whole life. I grew up in Prairie Village, and now I live out halfway to Oklahoma in Stillwell. But here's what they found, is that the average American will move 10 times in their life. So you move 10 times. It used to be you lived in your same neighborhood or your small town or something, but today you're going to move 10 times in your life. And you may be moving just from Prairie Village to Overland Park to KCMO to somewhere else, but even those moves, especially when you're in high school or middle school and you're moving and you're changing high schools, you're no longer with the same kids you were with for several years, that affects you. But when you make those kind of moves across the country, You know, you start building friendships and then they're gone. And you know what happens when you move. Sometimes you maintain those relationships, but even my closest friendships and other, you know, when I was away at college and graduate school, we don't hang out together very much anymore, even if we still talk twice a year. This is something happens with all those moves. Used to be people had 2 or 3 jobs in their lifetime. Fast Company reported a couple of years ago that if you hope to get ahead in your life, in your career, you need to plan for switching jobs every 3 years for life. So you build a lot of your friends, you spend more time with people in the workplace than anywhere else, but if you're switching jobs every few years, what happens there? A significant number of marriages end in divorce, and you know, Levon and I were talking last night, and I said, you know, you are my best friend, but if something happened to her, or if she left, or I left, you've suddenly lost a whole key part of your friendship network. When we retire today, I don't know about you, but many people in Johnson County have a dream of retiring where? Florida maybe? Scottsdale, Cabo San Lucas. You know, we have these elaborate places we're going to go retire. So I find it interesting, and of course we have this dream we're going to retire early, so we're going to retire when we're in our 50s maybe, or 60. So you retire and you leave behind the whole social network that you had, and you got to start all over again, you know, at 55 or 60 or 65 or 70. So all of these things play some role in that, but of course one of the biggest critical issues we know is technology, right? And so I find this interesting. And Levon and I get irritated with each other about this because if I'm driving, she gets in the car and instantly she's on her phone. She does not believe this. She doesn't think she does this, but she's on her phone and she's answering email or she's responding to something. And then, you know, I find when she's driving, I get in the car, I do the very same thing. And so we used to talk with each other while we were driving down the road. But now I'm driving and she's talking with other people digitally, or she's driving and I'm talking with other people. And we see this in restaurants where there are people who are sitting at the table, same table, and they're all on their phones while they're at the restaurant. Right? I appreciate that Nick and Jake's, they have baskets that they give to families when you sit down at the table to put your cell phones in, so you actually talk to each other while you're sitting down to dinner. Gene Twenge, a professor of psychology at San Diego State, speaks of today's young adults as iGen. And this is the generation that's grown up with cell phones. They didn't know a time where they didn't have a mini computer and digital interface, you know, in their pocket. And of course, these can contribute wonderfully to social connections, right? We really appreciate that. But they can also contribute to social isolation, which we all know. So she noted in an article in The Atlantic that this generation is on the brink of the worst mental health crisis in decades. Much of this can be traced to their cell phones. The number of teens who get together with their friends dropped by more than 40% between 2000 and 2015. So today we get together with our friends digitally. We text each other, we send messages, Instagrams and pictures or whatever it is. And but you know, when you're struggling, it's not the same thing to get an emoji with a sad face as it is to actually have somebody you're holding in your arms and hugging. And I think about when I was a kid growing up, my stepdad was an alcoholic, and you know, there'd be times I'd come home and he'd be in an alcoholic rage, and he'd punched holes in the walls or taken a sledgehammer to furniture or something else. And you know, as I went to the kids in my youth group, my best friends, and we sat and sometimes we'd talk until 1 or 2 in the morning. But today we get on our cell phones and we share that with people. And that's great that we have those kind of people to share with, but it's just not the same as looking in each other's eyes, hearing the tone of voice that we have, and caring for one another. So sometimes when we're feeling alone and lonely, we withdraw. I've seen this happen many times. We get depressed, and particularly when people get depressed, they tend to withdraw from other people, which is the exact opposite of what you need to do, but it's the natural tendencies to cocoon or to pull away from other folks. And sometimes when we're rejected, we feel afraid of getting hurt by other people, and so we withdraw from our social connections. One woman in my congregation described her struggle with this in this way. She said, "Rejection for me came at an early age. Loneliness soon followed, then mental illness and relational conflict. I've been in beautiful relationships that I have destroyed because I was afraid of others leaving me. My mantra was, I will leave you before you've had a chance to leave me. Everything they do is scrutinized or tested to see if they still care for me. And when I finally test them beyond what they can bear, it breaks both our hearts. Those I care for the most are the ones that I fear losing the most. And it's hell on earth that I experience daily, being afraid of losing those friendships." And I can tell you, this woman, she has done everything she can to push me away. I mean, she's said things that were hurtful at times because she's always afraid that I'm going to reject her. And the other day she said, you have so surprised me because you're the one person that has not rejected me for all the ways I have tried to reject you. Sometimes it's hard to love people. She is a very difficult person to love. And yet I am determined that I'm going to do my best to make sure she knows that she is still cared for by somebody. And that's the kind of work that we have to do. It's work to love people sometimes. It's work to befriend them. It's hard to have friends. Like you have to do something to make this thing happen. It just doesn't happen by itself. I mean, every once in a while. But there are times that you're hard to love too. And you need people who are going to come alongside you and love you. So among the common sense therapies, you know this, we encourage people to be with people, right? That's really important. Positive psychologists will tell you, gosh, you got to be out being with people. And part of what you do with people is you volunteer. So volunteering is a huge way of connecting with people. And you connect with the people you're volunteering with and the people you're volunteering for. You get a pet. That might help sometimes. Sometimes you get a part-time job when you're retired. My mom retired a couple of years ago, and she thought, hey, this is great. I'm not going to have to work. And then she retired, and she found out, I'm sitting in my house all the time by myself. So she began doing two things. She started working part-time at Menards. And you know, most of the workforce at Menards are retirees. And the company made a serious decision that, you know what, we think there are retirees who need a job. They need it sometimes for their mental health more than they do for the paycheck. But we're going to be a place where retirees can come and work. And I love that. I'm so grateful that my mom is working there because she's one of those kind of hermits. But then she also began volunteering more and more. And then she got involved in the Johnson County Y, and they have programs for retirees. And then she got involved in the city of Olathe and things that Olathe is doing, and more involved in the church. And my point in all of that is that it takes a village of opportunities for people to find places where they can build friendships and connect. And all of us in this room have some role to play in that. All right, so I was thinking about this and the idea of how important our investment is in relationships. And I don't know, I'm guessing most of you have a 401k, you've got some kind of investments that you're saving up for retirement. Maybe some of you younger people haven't done that yet, but many of you have. And we spend a lot of time thinking about our investments for retirement. And we have somebody who analyzes those every year, and they look over to see, yeah, it looks like you're on track, or no, you need to put a little more money aside. But researchers have said that the single most important factor in how happy you are in retirement is the number of relationships you have that are meaningful. So it's possible that we need to be thinking less about our 401k and more about the relationships that we need to cultivate, because that's going to actually contribute more to our happiness when we're older than how much money we have in our 401k. I'm nearing the end of this, but I want to share a couple more things. In Great Britain, they recognized the health costs of loneliness, and they started a campaign against loneliness. This became something across the country they've been focusing on. There was one small town I was reading about, and they started what they called the Silver Helpline. And this is it's a town of, I think it was maybe 10,000 people. But they started this phone number where people in the town would just answer the phones and talk. And the second year they did this, they had 428,000 people who called this town of 10,000 to talk to somebody. I mean, these are all the kinds of things that we do. At Resurrection, we have a ministry called Silverlink, which is for aging adults. And what we recognized is that a lot of folks who are in nursing homes, retirement centers, assisted living centers have no other family here in Kansas City, or they have nobody who comes to see them regularly. So we have hundreds of people who go out and they take their pets with them and they go visit in the nursing homes. So there's like 36 care centers that we go and see. We have people who take their grandchildren or their children just so they have a chance to connect. And part of what I find is that many of the people who go out and connect are people who are also looking for connections. And somewhere sitting down with somebody who's in their 90s, talking about their life story actually blesses both of them. So we all have a role to play. And I love the fact that 0 Reasons Why is being recognized today. I had the privilege of being a part of some of those early meetings with that group, and an amazing group of young people have said, we have a role to play in helping people in our schools feel like they're connected and they're cared for, and that there's 0 reasons why to end your life. 47,000 people took their own lives in the U.S. in the last year, for which we have statistics. 1.2 million attempted. Middle-aged men most likely to complete suicide, you know that. Although young adults, 15 to 24, are 4 times more likely to contemplate suicide than anyone else. We all have a role to play in eliminating or addressing social isolation. A couple more little quotes and ideas. The Gallup poll folks ask a question in their workplace poll every year. And the question is, do you have a best friend in the workplace? And here's what they find. And I wish they hadn't said best friend. I wish they just said good friend. I don't know the best friend idea I'm not really sure about, but the good friend idea is important. And here's one of the things. They did one of these surveys on women, and they found that women who felt they had a best friend in the workplace were twice as likely to be engaged in their workplace than those who didn't. Twice as likely to be engaged in their work. Profits went up by 12% in those companies. There were 36% fewer safety accidents. Even customers were more engaged because employees had a significant relationship in the workplace. So at Resurrection, one of the things we've tried to do, and we still have a long way to go on this, is we plan events where we have fun together. We want people. We don't look at it as like a waste of their time or our time if they're building friendships in the workplace. We recognize that we're a stronger and healthier place if people have friendships in the workplace. They don't want to go looking for other jobs. They want to be connected. And if they're connected with friends there, they stay in the workplace. And a recent AARP study in conjunction with Stanford University found that people who were not socially connected in retirement cost Medicare an additional $1,600 per year. Add up all 14% of retirees who are not connected with other people, and that's $7 billion a year is the cost to the government of social isolation. So counties have a role to play, cities have a role to play, and of course businesses have a role to play. I appreciate, Julie, you shared with me that H&R Block has started an initiative where they're saying, okay, we're not just about doing taxes, we're also about helping people connect, and so they're providing, I think it was $6 million in grants, and looking at how they're organizing neighborhoods here in Kansas City, their hometown, to create healthier neighborhoods. This is part of the role that they have seen is critical in the workplace. All right. Lastly, I'll make a little pitch for the religious community. AARP has found that people who are connected in a faith community are 40% less likely to report social isolation. They live longer, they live healthier, they live happier lives because they are connected with other people. And often we lose that, and today's younger generations are sometimes not as involved in faith communities as they once were. But something happens when you get together in small groups, Sunday school classes, Bible studies, when you sit by the same people and worship week after week. You build relationships with people who will care for you, and you have a chance to care for other people. So I end with this. My mother-in-law, Bernice, recently fell and broke her hip. She lives on her own. She's 85 years old, and she fell. She broke her hip in a bad way, and she ended up in the hospital, and I had a chance to witness this up close and personal, because at 85, it's kind of scary when you're in the hospital and the doctors are saying, this is a tough break, and we're going to figure out we're going to do the surgery, but we don't know it'll be quite as easy to recover as it might have once been. And this was her second broken hip. She broke the other one about 2 years ago. And what I watched while I was sitting in the hospital was the friends from her Bible study walking into the hospital room. Then I watched the flowers begin to arrive from the bulletin stuffers that she stuffs bulletins with on Friday. And then the people offering to bring meals by once she'd gone home. And then the important role that family played in coming along and caring for her and giving her hope. And in all of those ways, what she had was a whole team of stretcher bearers who were carrying her. But that required that she invested time in those relationships, and it required that there were places where she could connect. And because of that, what she found is somebody to lean on. And her friends have found in her someone that they can lean on. So we all have a role to play, and this is a really important topic. And I want to encourage you, as you're thinking about the coming year and addressing social isolation, that this really, really matters. So let's find our stretcher bearers. Let's figure out ways to help people who normally wouldn't find them to find them. And let's bear one another's burdens. And in that way, we find life. Hey, thanks a lot.